We all live in Somerville. It's the greatest place. A lot of fun things in Somerville. A lot of things to taste.
Hi, welcome back to Raising Families. I'm really excited to be here. I haven't been here in a while, but we're opening back up with a very exciting show. I'm really thrilled about this show, actually, because I think it's we're going to discuss something that is of the utmost importance to the world and to the heading towards a society that all of us want, where people are able to understand difference and actually celebrate difference, as opposed to being afraid or not liking difference. So I think you're going to find it an exciting show. And with me today is Debbie LeeKeenan, who is a visiting professor in early childhood education at Lesley University in Cambridge. She was the director and lecturer at the Elliott Pearson Children's School, Laboratory School for the Department of Child Study and Human Development at Tufts University. Her past professional experience includes over 40 years of teaching in diverse university, public schools, and early childhood settings. She's a published author in numerous journals and books, including Young Children and the 100 Languages of Children, first edition. And her most recent book, which we'll show you in a few minutes, written with Louise Derman Sparks and John Nimmo, is Leading Anti-Bias Early Childhood Programs, A Guide for Change. Debbie presents at numerous conferences, locally, nationally, and internationally, and is a consultant for various school systems and educational organizations, including School Systems in Somerville. So we are very, very happy and lucky to have her. So welcome, Debbie. I'm so excited to talk to you about this.
Thank you.
So what we thought, I spoke to Nomi Davidson at the Early Childhood, I know her from the Early Childhood Advisory Council, and told her that we wanted to think about doing a show on holidays and the different holidays of the children in the city and how they might celebrate and what the differences are, and just in general what we would like parents and children to know about other cultures, and anything else that you want to teach us about that would be wonderful. So.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It is a very important topic. I agree with you. It's been actually one of my life passions, thinking about how do you create communities that support all kinds of differences, whether we're talking about religious differences, ethnic differences, linguistic differences, socioeconomic differences, family styles. I myself am a third-generation Chinese American, and am married to an Irish American and have adult children who are biracial, multiracial granddaughter. So for me, both personally and professionally, this has been a very important topic. And today, I mean, it's very timely for many reasons. You asked about holidays. Today is the first night of Hanukkah. We have, other holidays coming up, the Christmas holiday, Kwanzaa, but actually, one way to look at holidays, particularly at this time of year, is looking at it as the season of light, and what are the similarities and differences among the different holidays. There's also Diwali, there's some Native American holidays that also occur during this time of year, and that's one of the ways we encourage in schools when I work with teachers, is to think about, rather than just focusing on one specific holiday, what are the similarities and differences across holidays?
That's a great idea.
And you can look at that in the winter, you can look at that in the spring, in the autumn, because actually many of the holidays around the world are related to the natural cycle of things.
Oh, didn't know that. See, already, that's wonderful.
And I think another thing when I've been thinking about, what would be an important message for families in particular, is that, of course, we have our own traditions in our own families, and that's important to instill them and create pride in our families and in our children. But it's also a great opportunity to kind of look outside and look at how are things done differently. I always say it's very important for children to think of the different experiences as both windows and mirrors. Okay, a mirror is when you see something, you want it to reflect yourself. So if you're in school and the teacher is reading books to you, you hope those books or the books that you're reading, you'll be able to see yourself in it.
Yes.
And in the same way, though, it's an opportunity. We want children to have windows so they can look outside and see things that are different than them. So particularly around holidays, that's a good time to think about that concept of windows and mirrors. So when we celebrate a holiday, let's say it's Hanukkah or Christmas or Kwanzaa at this time of year, it's important to know that there are many different ways that people celebrate that. There may be, quote, the traditional way or the religious way that we celebrate these holidays, but it's important to know that not everyone celebrates it the same way.
Right.
And that there are, even within the same holiday, there are different ways to do that. So I think it's a great opportunity. We, in the school setting, we call these teachable moments, opportunities that just happen every day, but to capitalize on that as a way to, not so much lecture to our children or teach our children, but have them opportunities to think about that there are other ways of being in addition to how we are.
I think too, one of the things I notice just from my own experience is that little ones generally don't have, as a natural state or an inherent quality, don't have feelings of racism, for example, or really afraid of difference. They're more curious.
Yes.
They look at each other with curiosity and, usually smiles at a certain age. It's just like, oh, there's somebody who's like me and different than me or something. You can almost see it on their face.
Right.
So I think we're not so much lecturing them to teach them, but we're trying to hold on to maybe the natural flow of what they would feel if it wasn't introduced in a way, if difference wasn't introduced in a way that made them suspicious or nervous or something, right?
And that's often depends on how the adults around them respond to the questions and comments that children make when they notice someone who's different from them.
Yes.
So I always like to give the example of, you're in the supermarket and you're in line and one little child notices someone in a wheelchair, and usually the child says, "Oh, look, there's that person in the wheelchair." And typically the people they're with, whether it's their family members, or other, often will do what? They go, "Shh,
Right.
don't say anything." And we do that only because we're often embarrassed or not, and maybe embarrassed for the person, embarrassed for yourself, your child, you're not sure how to respond. But sometimes if we don't respond, it gives a message that maybe there's something wrong with that, right? Or we shouldn't talk about that, or we shouldn't ask questions about it. So in early childhood, we often say, it's important to try to be very natural and try to figure out what the child is asking and just very matter-of-factly try to answer their questions. And if you're not sure exactly, to say, "I'm not sure," to but not to kind of squash their curiosity or questions, because I do believe in how we respond to children's questions about difference makes a difference in how they think about it. Is it something that's okay? Is there something wrong with it?
Sure.
And also, as you said, there are almost like developmental stages that children go through in understanding these concepts. And in the early childhood years, a lot of it is just, curiosity, and they may have opportunities. It's an opportunity to learn new ideas, new ways to think about it. Sometimes they pick up misconceptions, and we often call that a stage called pre-prejudice. So that and pre-prejudice is when children have misconceptions, like they may think that someone who has dark skin is dirty, because if they have light skin and they play in the dirt, it actually turns brownish.
Right.
So
And
you
then
may
they're
hear
dirty.
a child say to someone who has dark skin, "Oh, that person's that person's dirty. And they don't mean that's not a racial slur if a 3-year-old or 4-year-old says that. But often adults hear that and kind of freeze up and are, oh, what do I do? How do I respond? And it's clearly just trying to find out what they mean, or why do you think that? Or I often might ask if there are two children talking and saying that, I might say to the child who has the darker skin, is your hand dirty? And often the child might say, no, that's my skin color. Or they may say, oh yeah, I forgot to wash my hands. So, again, we kind of as adults kind of jump to conclusions and make assumptions, maybe what the child is saying or asking. So I think it's, when we hear questions from children, just to pause and try to figure out what they're asking, or ask them more about it, get more information, and then try to be honest and try to answer their questions to the best of your ability.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Not give them, I heard somebody say one time too, don't give them more information than what they're asking for too. That's another tip, right?
Yes, we often overreact. Exactly. So, oh my goodness, I bet there's a real problem here, and they were maybe simply just asking something right on that. Yeah.
So what kinds of holidays are being celebrated in Somerville, do you know? Were they all the ones that you just said in the beginning, like Hanukkah and Kwanzaa?
You mean during this time of year?
Yes, this time of year is
I
what I meant,
actually brought my little handout here, which is called Celebrations Across Cultures, because I do a lot of trainings in schools, and of course I'm teaching at Lesley University right now and teach a course on anti-bias, early childhood education. And one of our topics coming up in class is around how to avoid what I call the holiday syndrome. Because often in schools, also teachers get very, are worried, can I talk about holidays? Should I talk about holidays? I want to be sensitive. Which holidays do I talk about? And there's not a clear-cut answer, but usually what we say is, first of all, you need to see who's in your program. The most important thing in early childhood is to be responsive to the needs of your children and families in your particular program, school, or community. So just what you said, to find out what are the holidays, what are the traditions that are celebrated within your community, and then to always start with that, because that's more meaningful. If you pick a holiday that no one knows about, it could often be looked at as exotic or unusual. On the other hand, you can if you do that in a developmentally appropriate way, it provides that window, what we talked about. So it's finding that balance. I don't know, some teachers say, well, which holidays should we do? Which are the regular holidays and which are the unusual? I said, well, to an individual person, their holiday is important. So start with who's in your program. Does that include your children, your families, staff members, teachers, I think that's a wonderful opportunity to do that. And so anyway, back to my little handout here, I actually have it divided by different types of holidays around different seasons. So right now, this is the winter solstice season, and a lot of these celebrations of light. So there's, of course, the Christmas holiday, the Hanukkah holiday, which, as we said, starts tonight, Diwali, which is an Indian holiday, often happens in October or November, or sometimes in December. The Iroquois Midwinter Festival is also a festival of light. Kwanzaa, which some people think is an African-American holiday, often celebrated in December, but it's actually a harvest holiday. It's celebrating it comes from the idea of the harvest. This is one of our books that we often use to talk about that. But they often have also a candle that are part of that tradition. So that's why it's often included, and it's celebrated in December. But I just wanted to mention it actually comes from a harvest holiday, which we think is our fall, right? But it depends where you live when you have your harvest. St. Lucia Day is another day that's often celebrated by many Christian families in Europe, and that's often celebrated on December 13th, which also uses candles.
Right, I think I've heard about this one.
Yeah, so, I mean, all of these holidays, no one is, you wouldn't think you as an individual may know all about them, but I think it's an opportunity even to research it as a family. Let's see what other people do in December. Or what other holidays involve candles or have some, and again, that focus on similarities and differences, because in some ways we're the same, and in some ways we're different. And I think that's one of the best messages we can give our children, to have a more peaceful world, to develop tolerance and understanding, is to try to find what are the commonalities, but also acknowledge that differences are good and to appreciate them.
Right, they don't have to be something very scary, especially at this time of what's going on in the world. It seems more important than ever to be able to talk about these things and
Exactly.
where we are the same and where we're different.
Right.
I'm reminded when we're talking about holidays too that I mentioned this to you when we talked on the phone, but my children grew up as Jehovah's Witnesses for a certain amount of time. We're not Jehovah's Witnesses now, and I don't intend to be one. They had some ideas that were very, very wonderful, and I still think they're wonderful in terms of how to have a more just and loving world, and I like those. And then there are other things that I no longer, believe are for me, but I really respect the religion. But that being said, Jehovah's Witness children don't celebrate any holidays at all. So I have some funny and heartbreaking and all kinds of stories about when my children were in school. I know that things have progressed dramatically since then, but at one time at Halloween, a teacher thought she was helping my child by giving him a costume and having him parade with all the other children. And he didn't do that because that wasn't part of a Jehovah's Witness tradition. But that being said, so what would teachers do now, or what do they do?
Well, one of the first things I think is, again, as I said, to find out what are the backgrounds of the children and the families in your program. One thing I usually recommend is to do some kind of outreach in the beginning of the year, whether it's through meeting with families, through an interview, whether it's through a home visit or through a form, but to find out and be specific, what are the holidays and cultural traditions that you embrace in your family? What are some important things you want the teacher to know about your traditions? Just like we often ask, families about what kind of medical issues, or my child allergic to anything, we need to know that in schools. I think it's also important to know other kinds of practices that families have. They may do it at home, but that may impact what goes on in school. So the first thing is we need to know that information. And then once you know that information, I remember as a teacher myself when we had a Jehovah Witness family in our school, in my classroom, one of the things I would do right away is get to know her, because I also know that everyone may practice being a Jehovah Witness in different ways, and how they look at the celebration. Some are very firm about that, some are not as firm. In my experience, that I found there's a range. So find out what they think, what they would like to see happen. And one example I can think about was around birthdays, not necessarily, but I knew about the big holidays, and we kind of downplayed traditional ways of thinking about holidays, may do more of this learning about holidays, but not celebrating holidays in school. But I know the issue of birthdays came up with our Jehovah Witness family, and in some schools, in some classrooms, families come in and want to have a big celebration at school, have snacks, do whatever, sing happy birthday. And one year, with this particular family, we thought about what would be a good compromise, what would be comfortable for them, and we came up with the idea that the way we'll honor or acknowledge birthdays in our classroom would be to have each child pick a special book that they would like read on that day. It could be a book from home, they bring from home. It could be a book that we had in the classroom. And that was it, but it was that everyone, and it became very special. It was incorporating literacy, and it was also a way to, it was, but it was also what we call finding that third space. I think when there's the home and then the school, there are always potential for conflicts to occur, and often the child is caught in the middle. It could be about holidays, it could be about other things, other practices. And I think the goal always is to find that third space, find
like
that
that
common
term.
ground.
Yes,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, where we try to, learn to listen from each other and try to understand where the family's coming from, the family to understand kind of what the school practices or what the school situation is. And then we don't want some things at home and school can be different, but if possible, you don't want the child caught in the middle.
Right, that's the biggest
That's one of our
issue.
goals in terms of that. The other thing I think in schools, and I think this is applicable also for home in terms of seeing holidays as a teachable moment kind of for education, is that some holidays have a lot of stereotypes embedded in them, or potential for stereotypes to be embedded in them. I think of, we just celebrated Thanksgiving, in the United States, right? And so they're the traditional views of the old school Thanksgiving, as I used to say when I was little, and the pageant with the pilgrims and the Native Americans with the feathers and the headdress, and to know that, not all, many Native Americans, maybe most, don't see Thanksgiving as necessarily a time for celebration in terms of that.
Yeah.
So I think to kind of, I know this is kind of a politically charged topic sometimes, but I think of it as taking the politics out of it, just to know that we really don't know what happened. We were not there.
Right.
So to be able to present that there are many different points of view in history, when you talk about Thanksgiving, when you talk about Columbus Day, I think of Columbus Day. This is one of my favorite books. I don't know, it's called Encounter by Jane Yolen. And there are many stories about Columbus, quote, discovering America. Now, of course, we know that he did land in the islands here in this hemisphere, and there were people who were already there. So it was a new experience for him, but it wasn't like people didn't know it was there. But this particular story, what I like about it is, so you may have some stories or books that talk about one version of what happened in 1492. This is another version that talks about the experience from the perspective of this little boy, this Taino Indian who lived on the island, and what the experience was like for him. So I think there's a lot of, actually more and more, particularly now, literature, children's books that are very accessible, that you can read to elementary age children, to young children, and kind of show that there are many different ways of thinking about what happened in history and where these holidays come from. That a lot of them have either historical roots or agricultural roots to that.
Right, and that not everybody's viewing them the same.
Right.
I really like that. That's
Right,
That's
so it's
very
another
important.
kind of teachable moment, as I say, yeah.
I have multiple cultures right within my family. I have two of my children, in fact, are married to Filipino spouses.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
They didn't know each other or anything, but so I want, my grandchildren to have both of those
Listening.
cultures and not give, I think,
Yes.
not give either of them up.
Right.
They need to be able to feel proud of their Filipino heritage as well as, this heritage. And this is good to have many different ideas of what that culture is.
Right,
It's not just
right. It's
one.
not even just one way.
Right, it
Exactly.
can be many.
The differences
Yeah.
within similarity, as we say. Yeah.
So I did just get a signal that we're 5 minutes towards the end. These go so
Goes quickly.
don't
We've
they?
just
I mean, there's so
started
much
chatting.
more we could say. But what would you want parents to take home from this show? Particularly, it's mostly a show for parents, we hope.
Yes.
And what would be the key thing about how they can help their children to be, more accepting, or not more accepting, continue to be
Yes.
accepting
Yes.
of other people and other cultures? And
Yeah. Well, I think the concept we talked about, the windows and mirrors, I think that's
that's
something that
great.
can happen at home, and it happens in so many different ways. The books that you choose for when you read to your children, or that they're going to read themselves, make sure they are providing both mirrors and windows. The other issue about listening carefully to children's questions, don't ignore them, and try. And even if you may not know all the answers, and it's okay to say that, because we're all learning together, and that's a good thing that families see that as learning is ongoing. It's a lifelong experience. And I think my one of my other sayings I like to think about is that attitudes are caught, they're not taught. So how it's not just the content, just the facts, but it's how we present them, our body language, our attitudes towards that. Because I think that's what children really pick up. If we look uncomfortable when we see someone who's different than us on the street or in the neighborhood or in our, on television, and if we show that, kids pick that up. So I think it's a chance for us to all kind of be reflective ourselves, and particularly as we said, we live in a very diverse world. Things are changing all the time. Particularly in Somerville, it's we live in a very wonderfully diverse community, and to embrace that and to see it as, again, this wonderful opportunity to learn from each other and learn together.
Great. That's wonderful. You gave me some ideas, because I think one of our traditions in my family is that I spend Christmas Eve with my younger grandchildren, and we read the night before Christmas and a couple of those traditional stories, and I'm going to bring some of these types of books and just have some discussions.
Great.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed having you. Thank you. I just wanted to say one more thing to anybody who might be watching, because we are seeing such scary things in the world, and there is usually information about how to talk to your children on the website for the city's early childhood advisory folks and the Family Learning Center. So if you need some tips or want some help with that, you can go to those websites. The city website would send you to those websites, and you can read about ways to talk to your children about those problems.
Great idea.
So thank you again for coming, Debbie.
Thank you
and
for
we'll
inviting
see
me.
everybody next month.